Today on Which Port is the Best, we are checking out one of the arcade's classic side-scrolling shoot-em-ups. This is Nemesis. I won't get into technical details, but we'll just say that the game is known as Gradius in Japan. Most of the world nowadays also refers to it as Gradius. I will likely refer to it as Nemesis through this video. Now, some of these versions are technically labelled as Gradius, although the vast majority of these in this video are titled as Nemesis, so it can get a little bit confusing from time to time. Generally known as an arcade favourite, including myself, this title actually predates R-Type by around a year and a half. The aim of Nemesis is to battle through each stage. A great game mechanic is by shooting down rows of enemies, you'll be presented with a power-up which allows the player to upgrade speed of the ship, as well as adding bombs, lasers, and much more. Anyways, as always, we are starting off with the worst of the bunch. Let's go! I found that the Amstrad CPC version of Nemesis to be the worst of all ports. Reason being is simply due to the speed of the game. As we know, the game can get very busy very quickly, but this port seems to struggle displaying just a few sprites at a time. Literally on the first wave of enemies as the game began, I could see and feel a slowdown, and this does matter when playing further into the game when you need to dodge bullets flying at you in all directions. The game itself isn't the best looking game either, particularly. It does appear to be pretty blocky starting from scratch. Rather than having a full presentation once the game loads up, we are presented with a rather mundane one-player or two-player in block white text. Just seems a little formal for a fun side-scrolling shoot-em-up game. Now, although this isn't necessarily a terrible version of Nemesis, it does come with some setbacks. Firstly, there is no music at all, only on the introduction screen. Just sound effects throughout the game though, so that's not entirely the end of the world though. The real problem is the visibility of bullets being flown at you. Space is obviously black. The human mind, in my case, sees white speckles, which my subconscious tells me that these are background stars. An odd way of explaining how I feel about this. Am I the only one to think this way with this particular version? Gameplay wise, I mapped my keyboards to use the letter G to use upgrades and directional fire button using my joystick. A nice flowing game with some slight lag here and there when screen is moving. It is an impressive Spectrum game for a 1987 release, so like I say, this port of Nemesis really isn't that bad. In terms of toughness, yes, this game is challenging. Power-ups when using them appear to work very nicely too, such as lasers and speed. One thing to add is that rather than naturally seeing the cave appear as you fly towards it, the cave generates in front of your eyes just like the Amstrad version did. Sadly, I felt that the Commodore 64's treatment to Nemesis could have been a little better. Firstly, music or sound effects only whilst playing the game, but just simply turn on music by pressing a certain keyboard's key to make that happen. The big noticeable difference with this version is the speed of enemy sprites. Of course, it is mandatory to shoot rows of enemies to gain power-ups, but when they are travelling at the speed of light, this is harder said than actually done. Control-wise is fine, although emulating this rather than using one of my real Commodore 64s, I was actually unable to find the key to activate power-ups, and so you'll see me here in gameplay collecting these, but not using them. The graphics are mediocre for a C64 game of this era, but nothing too special. I can spot a C64 colour palette a mile off, and this uses those almost dull colours. I think with the enemy sprites speed being toned down and slighter brighter colours used, this could have been a little higher up in this list. As slow as the NEC PC 88's version is, there is something really charming about this version. It totally reeks old school. The music is spot on and the graphics and sprites are average for this Japanese computer's version. Control and collision detection is also spot on. I actually really enjoy playing this version, but I am being analytical here. Does this closely match the arcade original? Well, the main thing that lets it down, of course, is the pace of this version. It is one of the slowest versions in this list. You might think it would be easier, but no, absolutely not. There isn't any sprite flicker when the screen becomes overwhelmed with enemies, which is a bonus. A very nice port that many should have been happy with back in the day who owned a PC 88. The MSX2 conversion of Nemesis is a solid one. Its response to the controls, maneuvers are very good with no delay, firing as well as selecting power-ups flow very nicely too. Graphically, this is a fairly impressive looking game with nice vibrant colours used and nicely animated sprites to go with it. Is this game hard? It most certainly gets busy on screen. With this comes minimal lag, which is surprisingly impressive considering how many sprites can often appear simultaneously. The music is a lovely rendition of its source material, and with this also comes sound effects at the same time. In terms of scrolling, this version isn't that bad at all. Sprites move nicely, but there's a slight delay in revealing more of the stages as you progress. The MSX2 port of Nemesis is totally fine, although a tad bit slow due to the computer's processing power. The Sharp X1 computer's port of this game is brilliant. In fact, as chaotic as the game got, I find controlling the ship easier for some reason with this version. Music first is perfect, as well as the colours and sound effects used. Oddly enough though, for those who know about British early 1980s computers, the BBC Micro that is, the colour in this X1 version kind of reminded me of the colours used in most BBC games. Yes, this conversion isn't 100% perfection, but it is totally enjoyable game to play. By not perfect, I am talking about slower paces scrolling. Now technically, as this is slowed down, one might presume the difficulty level would be easier. It really isn't at all. This port is tough as balls. If you have yet to experience the Sharp X1's version, give it a go and see what I mean. A very good attempt indeed. The Sega Saturn's Gradius Deluxe Pack wasn't a great version. So, I know I've got a lot of Sega Saturn hardcore fans, so it seems, who subscribe to the channel, but obviously I'm doing this as my point of view. It looks nice and true to the original arcades game, but this port suffered with major delay and control response times. This made it fairly difficult to play for the obvious reasons. In a game like Nemesis, controls need to be top notch, otherwise the difficulty level is unnecessarily ranked to 100%. A real shame, as this deluxe pack could have ranked higher up in this list. Sega Saturn haters will hate, but as always I try to give a fair assessment of most aspects in these videos. The Nintendo Entertainment System's port of Nemesis is a truly solid 8-bit console game. The gameplay mechanics feel like the arcade game itself, and the music is constructed very nicely to emulate the sound of the original arcade version. The accompanying sound effects also complement the arcade game very well. The NES game, of course, suffers from sprite flicker, which is to be expected for most NES games when too many sprites are presented on screen at the same time. This isn't too off-putting if you're a NES veteran like myself. It's part and parcel of how the games are. There is no lag at all from what I have seen on this version. It is nicely presented with nicely detailed 8-bit colourful sprites. Is this port tough? It is a NES game after all. Of course this one's tough. Next up, we have got the Nintendo Wii's Virtual Console port of this. So the initial thing that struck me with this version was the colours used. As you can see in the gameplay footage, everything kind of looks like it was having a filter covering the natural colours, but this is actually how it played. Everything else played and sounded fine. Not really much more to say about this version, but there is better to come later in this list. As you can see by the gameplay, the release for the PC Engine or TurboGrafx 16 is just pretty much perfect in every way. No sprite flickering, no lagging, controls are as fluid as the source game itself, and the soundtrack even sounds like an upgrade from the original game itself in my opinion. Toughness level of this port is very similar, or so it seems, to the level of difficulty that the arcade game gave us. An amazing version of an amazing side-scroll shoot 'em up, most definitely. If you can't play the real thing, the arcade version that is, then I think this is one of the best things you can play. The OG PlayStation, or original PlayStation, also received the same treatment as the Sega Saturn. This is the Gradius Deluxe Pack. Although this version seemed much better to control with no input and control delay issues, everything else was totally enjoyable experience of the original arcade game and was pretty much spot on with the source material. Now the Gradius Deluxe Pack also comes with the sequel Gradius, but obviously for this video, this is just like the Sega Saturn's version, the original game we're playing here, which is very awesome. Now, surprisingly, we have another amazing version for the Japanese powerhouse machine. This is the Sharp X68000. Just like many other arcade classics, this version is way above others and way ahead of its time too. I have said before in other videos, whilst most of the world were pressing down on rubber key maps, the Japanese had an almost near perfect experience at home if they were fortunate enough to own one of these beasts. The visuals and sound does all the speaking here yet again. Is the X68000 port hard? Yes it is, it really is. Now some will see the Sharp X68000 games as cheating, as these are widely known to be perfection in most cases, and so for that reason I have chosen the next version of this game on a platform outside of the Sharp X68000. I've decided to choose the PSP port as #1 position in my humble opinion to be the very best version of the game outside of the original 1985 release. The one thing I love about the PSP's Gradius collection is that not only is it a perfect port of the original, but it's also in what appears to be a larger gameplay screen. And as you can see in the gameplay footage, it looks a lot wider and there just seems to be more room to move around in. Everything is almost identical to the original, and the original music and sound effects is also incorporated too. After defeating the first boss, the pixelation has also been slightly blurred so it doesn't look too messy. A small upgrade if you will. So that's it. What do you think about my choices? Now before you start commenting and saying the Sega Saturn version should be there, the PC Engine version should have been higher up, remember this is all subjective opinions, so this isn't no official countdown, this is my personal opinion, so just remember my opinions isn't yours. Anyways, until next video comes, thanks for watching.